My brothers, since the very beginning of time, since the very beginning of the creation of man, we have been at war with a sworn enemy. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in multiple places in the Quran, He reminds the human being that, O human being, O son of man, Shaitan, Iblis is your enemy, so therefore take him as an enemy. So much so severe is this animosity of Shaitan with the human being that from the moment you are created, there's a very nice narration that says that the first thing, ever watched a child come into this world? The first thing he does is he cries. And there's a narration that says that is because Shaitan waits for the baby to be born, and then he pricks him, he stabs him until he makes him cry, and he says to him, you and I, we are enemies. So imagine the moment that I came out of my mother, Shaitan was waiting there to declare his war with me and remind me that I am your enemy. Until the very last moment of your life, guess who will also be there waiting? The same enemy. Abdullah ibn al-Imam Ahmad radiallahu ta'ala anhuma, he says, I was there when my father was dying. Imagine Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, one of the great imams of this ummah. So Abdullah, his son, he narrates the story, and he says, I was there when my father was dying. And he says, and he was laying there on the bed, and he was going through this, what they call sakarat al-maut, the last moments of life. He's in and out of consciousness. He says, and as my father gained consciousness, he says, la ba'd, no, not yet, no, not yet. So Abdullah says, he says, I was curious that why is my father saying no, not yet? Doesn't he want to die? Is he afraid of death? He says, and then my father, he lost consciousness. He says, so I waited there and I was anxious and I was worried. He said, until I waited until my father, he gained consciousness again. And therefore I asked him, I said to my father, why were you saying no, not yet? Don't you want to die? And then Imam Ahmad, he says to his son Abdullah, he says to him, no, my son, I did not say no, not yet because I didn't want to die. I said no, not yet because Shaitan was standing in front of me and he was biting on his fingernails and he was telling me, oh Ahmad, you have slipped out of my hands. Ahmad, you've slipped out of my hands. So therefore I replied and I said to him, no, not yet. Not until I'm dead and gone is the war over between you and I. So if from the very moment I was born, Shaitan is there, and at the very last moment of my life, Shaitan is there, and he's there, and his oath and his promise to Allah is to show that I will be ungrateful, to try and distract me and take me away from Allah Azza wa Jal. And one of the biggest tricks of Shaitan is to belittle any good that you do. This is one of the traps and the tricks of Shaitan, is to belittle any good that you can do. And you find, Allahu Akbar, an amazing chapter in Riyadh al-Salihin about numerous ways of doing good. You see, we live in a time now where unfortunately, let's take boxing for instance as a sport. Everyone likes to think of himself as this heavyweight puncher, this boxer that's going to knock out his opponent with that heavy right hook. And so therefore any other punch other than the right hook, unfortunately, even within ourselves as Muslims, we tend to look down upon. And this is actually from Shaitan. Is that it? Is that all you did? Is that all you gave? Is that all you could do? This is from Shaitan. The Prophet ﷺ, he says in the authentic hadith, never belittle any act of good. Don't belittle it. Don't let Shaitan fool you and convince you that is that it. No, the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is never belittle any act of good. If there's any good that you can do, no matter what it is, do it. Allah Azza wa Jal, He says in the Quran, فَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ خَيْرًا يَرَى. Imagine Allah Azza wa Jal says, anyone who does an atom's weight of good. What is an atom? How insignificant is an atom to any human being? Something you can't even see with your own eyes. But Allah Azza wa Jal says, anyone who does an atom's weight of good, he shall verily see it on the day of resurrection. So my brothers and sisters, there are numerous ways of doing good. jump on them. Take every single opportunity that you can. The Prophet ﷺ, he says, even meeting your brother with a cheerful face, meeting someone with a smile on your face, that's a sadaqah, that's an act of charity. That's a means that Allah Azza wa Jal can reward you with good. Anything. Wallahi, it doesn't have to be dramatic. Sometimes we think that, look, if I can't give $10,000 in charity, well, therefore I shouldn't give any charity whatsoever. Why? How do you know? How do you know? By Allah, that one good deed could be the difference between Jannah and Jahannam. That one good deed. The Prophet ﷺ, he says that Allah loves the small action that's consistent. Allah loves this more than the large action, but it was a one-off. No, that consistency, even if it's small, Allah Azza wa Jal, He loves it. Any act of good, do it. Don't waste time. Wallah, my brothers, this is shaitan at his absolute best when he makes you feel insignificant, that whatever good you were going to do, that really in the scheme of things, what's it going to really change? No, is it good? Yes, then do it. Do it. Don't worry about how and where and why and really is it going to change anything. That's Allah's job. Your job and my job is that if Allah presents me with a situation, with an opportunity where I can contribute something. Imagine the Prophet ﷺ in the authentic hadith, he says there was a man running in Jannah. A man was running and he was enjoying his paradise. And guess what made him enter? He saw that a branch from a tree was coming out and that it was in the way of the Muslims. It was in the way of the walkway. So the man decided, he said to himself, I can see that this branch has become an inconvenience. It's become a nuisance for the Muslims. So I shall remove it to make things easier for the Muslims. That was the very action that made this man run around in his Jannah and enjoy his Jannah. From what did he do? Wallah, in the scheme of things, he removed a branch. The Prophet ﷺ, he says, the good and the bad deeds of my ummah was presented to me. He said, and I found that removing a harmful object from the road was put in their good deeds. Something as little as this. Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala anhu, in the authentic narration, he calls upon the Muslim women and he says, oh Muslim women, don't belittle any act of good, even if it's giving your neighbor the hoof. Imagine the foot of an animal. What value does that have? But to give that as a gift to your neighbor is an act of good. And this is Islam, that a believer should be the one who does good wherever he is, no matter what the situation is, no matter what the vibe. If you see an opportunity to do good, jump on it, because by Allah, you don't know what may come out of this. Think of it as a seed that you planted into the earth. You don't know what's going to come out of it. We do what we do for Allah's pleasure, and then we see whatever Allah wants to do.